Good afternoon. Hopefully you are here for the DARPA Cyber Grand Challenge panel. If you were expecting something else, it's in one of the other two ballrooms. But today we're going to talk about kind of a little bit of introspection on what we learned, but more focused on where we need to go based on what we learned. I'm very grateful that Dr. Brumley gave a great overview of the Cyber Grand Challenge this morning, and so I think that we all have at least hopefully just a very basic understanding if you were not familiar with it previously. So, you know, I say that we witnessed significant successes and we've had huge returns on investment with the few public challenges that we have executed as the Department of Defense. And looking forward, I think we need to continue to capitalize on these demonstrated successes, such as the DARPA Grand Challenge, such as Hack the Pentagon, we've done a Hack the Army, in order to significantly foster more research that advances you know, what is possible and the tools and the abilities, the capabilities that we have at our disposal. And specifically concerning this panel, it's about automated cyber reasoning. And how does this apply specifically to cyber conflict? And I think we heard bits and pieces that reinforced that idea. But at its roots, I would say that cyber conflict is a battle fought in code for control of information and systems. That at its roots, right, we have both us and the adversary are iterating and can modify code on the fly, and we are both trying to find ways to exploit that code and defend that code. And that code is what controls our systems. It's what controls the information that is so valuable to both sides. One other term, just so that I can have it out there, is cyber reasoning systems. I will use it, and I think some of the panel will use it. And that is a general term for this automated system that can find the vulnerabilities, patch them, exploit them. It reasons about code. It reasons about binaries in an automated fashion. For the DARPA Cyber Grand Challenge, they were specifically a server rack with a ton of compute. But it was really the systems and the tools that each of the teams developed to run on that server rack. I've assembled, somehow by luck or just because they were nice to me on the day that I asked them, 4 very brilliant minds for the panel today. And I would say that I have a couple of unifying characteristics between this very diverse group. One is that they all have a passion for solving very difficult problems in computer security. They all have a history of success at the world's most elite hacking competition, the DEF CON CTF, and they've all played a significant role in the DARPA Cyber Grand Challenge, and they continue to contribute to the research related to that. So I have first here to my left, your right, Dr. Tim Vitus. He's a distinguished engineer at SecureWorks. He led the infrastructure competition framework team for the Cyber Grand Challenge. He was also a referee at the final event. He was involved throughout it. He is a former member of the core of DD Tech, which organized the DARPA Capture the Flag, or not the DARPA, DEF CON Capture the Flag for 4 years. And also played previously to that on a team that won, School of Root, that was a 2-time winner of DEF CON CTF. And then next to his left is Dan Guido. He's the co-founder and CEO of Trail of Bits, a high-end software research firm that helps their clients reduce risk and fortify code. They were a competitor during the CGC qualifying event, and he's one of 2 teams that have fully open-sourced their components that they used in the DARPA Cyber Grand Challenge events. And then I have Dr. Brumley, who we introduced this morning, and he is, you should be familiar with his biography. And then finally on the end is Dustin Fraze, who's now a DARPA program manager with a keen interest in cyberspace operations automation. He previously served as the president and founder of Cromulence LLC, and he organized and ran the DEF CON Capture the Flag over the previous 4 years, and the qualifying and the finals event. So again, just all of them having lived in this world. As I was able to introduce you to the most elite members that played in our Army Cyber Stakes Capture the Flag, I also have a passion for Capture the Flag. I think that it's a way to really understand the fundamentals and to engage with these hard challenges that we have in the cyber domain. So what I've asked of my panel members, just to give you a little bit of a flavor of who they are and how they got started, is for each one of them to describe how they got started playing Capture the Flag, who or what like really just captured that first curiosity and got them hooked into the drug of CTF. So, Tim,
I'm first.
You can lead it off, please.
Probably have to go back to undergrad. So when I started college, I wanted to be an architect, and then I changed my mind and wanted to be an engineer. And then I changed my mind and thought computers might be a good place to go, and that's the one that stuck. And as I got further along in my undergrad career, I was introduced to the notion of information assurance or computer network security kind of space. And the head of the program at the time was a former director of R23 at Fort Meade. So I got a slightly different sort of view at information assurance than what you might get at a Midwestern state school. And when I got through the undergrad, I went directly on to a master's in the same program. There was more I could learn from that program, and sort of tricked them into allowing me to go to DEF CON and funding a trip to DEF CON. And that was pretty much the only year I actually went to talks at DEF CON. If you're not familiar, it's a huge conference in Las Vegas in the heat of the summer, so it's not the smartest location, but at the time it was much smaller. Now it's like approaching 20,000 people. That first time I went to talks, I engaged different parts of the community. It was a very interesting, eye-opening experience. If you haven't been and you're in this space, you should probably go to DEF CON like one time at least to experience it.
Only once.
What's that?
Only once.
And then never again, maybe. From the second year on, I was hooked, right? As you said, I was hooked, and part of what hooked me was this idea of competitions. And I sort of formulated a plan to be more involved in some of the competitions revolving around DEF CON, and in particular the Capture the Flag competition. So I went out to the Naval Postgraduate School for a few years, did some work as a Navy civilian, but also extracurricularly was involved in the School of Route team, which is sort of founded from the Monterey area and now is spidered around different parts of the planet. But we competed for many years, placed very well many years, won twice, 2 years. And every organizer only runs for a finite amount of time. Formally, there's only been a handful of organizers for the DEF CON CTF from 3 years, and the most recent team did 5-year stretch. But when the current organizer stepped down, there was an open call for who was going to organize, and we as the current champion were a bit conflicted because we had a guaranteed spot to come back and defend our title, but we pitched our concept for the next evolution of the game and ended up organizing it then for 4 years, and then turned over the reins and almost immediately started envisioning what ultimately became the Cyber Grand Challenge. So that same core group of folks that I competed with and then organized with went on to design and implement and ultimately execute the Cyber Grand Challenge. I think David said that it was one of the most nerve-wracking times of his life, this 8-hour period in Las Vegas right before DEF CON 2 summers ago. Equally so for us. They had a lot of time put into their machine, their cyber reasoning system, but the execution for that day landed on the shoulders of about 7 people for the core of the game, and then a much larger team picture to actually make the whole event go on. And that more or less brings us to here. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Winding.
Go ahead, Dan.
Dan.
Sure. So I'm Dan Guido, Trail of Bits. So the way that I got into security and the way that I got into CTF in particular, you have to go back about 15 years, maybe more than that. I was always a little bit of a mischief maker in high school and maybe even earlier. I didn't know it then, but what I was doing is I was bypassing security mechanisms to pull pranks on my teachers. So I managed to put 2 and 2 together and realize that maybe security was for me. And I was really what I think of as the cutoff line in like a generational issue where people younger than me typically are at schools where they're trained to be security experts, and people older than me are typically people that learned it on their own. So I see myself as somewhere along that dividing line. So I joined a university now called NYU Tandon that had a program for this. And my first semester there, I was recruited to play in a competition called NYU Seesaw, Cybersecurity Awareness Week, and their CTF Challenge. And that first year, I went head-to-head with someone who would later become one of my best friends, a guy named Mike Aiello, and he beat me. He got first place, I got second. And it created this overwhelming drive for me to discover more about it so that I could come back and win. But I never actually got that rematch. I ended up taking over control of that challenge and ran it myself for the next 4 or 5 years. Built it up from a competition of about 30 people to a competition of about 300, and then mentored the people that came after me until now it's the largest CTF competition in the world. That's going to be going on this weekend, and there'll be about 20 to 30, well, in the qualifying round leading up to it, there were about 20 to 30,000 people that played. So I've invested a lot in that particular university, and I taught there for many years as an adjunct, not as a full professor. And I've always taken an interest in helping other people in the industry kind of get a leg up and understand the path that I've gone down. So kind of community building and bringing people together and helping them figure out the skills that the people up here have and that others might want has been a defining aspect of who I am. And that leads to kind of our decision around the way I run my company and the fact that we open sourced a lot of the tools that we work on. I think that as a community we're better off if we can learn from and build upon the work of others. And it ends up being a good business decision for me as well. It's not something I do out of purely altruistic behavior, but it's something that from a business perspective works out. And I think as we go further down this panel, the position that I'll be representing is a lot of the commercial aspect and commercial utility of the tools that we've used and that we've developed for this competition. So I guess keep that in mind.
Very good.
Awesome. Hi, I'm David. I got into computer security really because I was doing IT at my undergrad, and that's how I put myself through undergrad. And then I went to Stanford and became what would today be called a CISO, but it was a computer security officer at Stanford, where we had thousands of intrusions. This is when DDoS became big, when like Yahoo and eBay were taken down from them. So that was kind of fun. I applied to the master's program then. My undergrad was in math, and I got rejected. And then I went to a professor named Dan Bonet, who taught cryptography, whose computer got broken into, and I argued with him, and then I got into Stanford. So I'm the only person I know that argued my way into grad school, as opposed to had any merit. And then from there, I started doing research, and I did that up through PhD. I did it up through becoming faculty. So I really didn't have a lot of CTF experience up until then. It was more on the research side and the IT side. And the way I got into it was really twofold. First, I had an undergraduate student named Brian Pack come to me, and he was trying to qualify to be part of another team at another place in order to get into DEF CON. In order to participate in one of the qualifying rounds, they needed to form a team. And I said, we're at Carnegie Mellon, for gosh sakes. It's a #1 ranked computer science program. Why don't you go ask your friends? And so he did. And they ended up doing very well that year in 2011 and just started totally owning competitions. And so the thing I take the most pride in is I don't consider myself a hardcore CTFer, but what I take pride in is that I've tried to help this student group be self-sufficient. So every year they recruit, and we've set up a system for doing that at CMU. They do a lot of training and so on. So I consider myself more of a CTF. I don't know, I call myself a sugar daddy in some ways. Like, it's to provide the support that's necessary to get things done. One of the defining aspects, actually, of how I looked at it and I saw the big impact that you could have was when we started running a high school hacking contest called Pico CTF, which last year reached about 18,000 US high school kids. We started this because a friend of mine named Jordan Weens, another computer security expert, was working with his local high school kids, and I thought that was awesome. And then I just decided to run a contest, so it was totally due to him.
Very awesome.
The way we came to Cyber Grand Challenge is we've been doing this work in automated exploit generation really since my PhD in 2003. And it was tough at times. There are people, if you go read through the web archives, that were making a lot of fun of the ideas, and I'm sure there's a lot of people now who question scalability and where we go, but we kept working on it, and we think one of the cool things about Cyber Grand Challenge is it showed how far the tech had come. Not that it's a complete solution today, but that it can do amazing things that really, in limited domains, is close to world class. And so we founded For All Secure to try to bring this to market. Particularly, we like being able to analyze applications that you're going to run, because we see today, everyone says, well, why do people buy insecure things? And from our viewpoint, no one knows they're buying insecure things. There's no crash test for programs. It's just not part of when you buy an Amazon route or something, you know. And so we're passionate about bringing that tech to help solve that problem.
Very good. Dustin, bring us home.
I'm Dustin. I guess about 12 years ago, I think it was probably my second sophomore year at USF, I got involved with there was a flyer for a computer security club, and I guess like Dan, been a little mischievous. I'm like, I'm interested in computer security. I want to try to learn what how hackers take over systems. And you know, I had read Elf 1 Smashing the Stack for Fun and Profit probably 30 times by that point. I was like, oh, this is complicated, and I'll never understand it. And it finally took sitting down with a group of like-minded, interested people, and like, all right, we're all just going to actually do what's in this paper, and you know, really try to understand it or learn by doing. And so I did that, and the goal of when we are at our first or second meeting of this computer security group, the organizing professor was like, we should make our goal to, there's this conference in Las Vegas, it's called DEF CON, it's got this really prestigious event called Capture the Flag, and you know, some of the best hackers in the world go there to play that. We should make it our goal to one day qualify and win this competition. We're like, yeah, sure, that sounds great. You know, a bunch of bright-eyed college students, sure, why couldn't we do that? So I think about a year later, we qualified and got thoroughly destroyed, last place with an embarrassingly low number of points. But that lit a fire under me where I was like, you know, we're here. We're not nobodies. We did very poorly, but we can do better. And so I think it took me about 2 years, and went on, and I think I won Tim's first year hosting.
I don't remember, one of the years.
2 of the years. I won your first year and your last year. And after we won your last year, like you, we were then the champions, and so you guys stepped down, and there was a call for the new organizers, and so I decided, once again, I was like, why not us? So I just finished the fifth and final year of running the DEF CON Capture the Flag. And probably, I think at the end of my first year, I was talking with Mike Walker, who was the founder of the Cyber Grand Challenge, and he's like, you guys had some really interesting, deep, complicated problems for your competitors this year. You should really consider looking and seeing if you'd be interested in being a part of this challenge I'm trying to do, where I'm trying to bring automation to the realm of what is traditionally thought of as a human-only realm. And so we did. So we were one of the challenge author teams. We wrote, I think, something like 70 challenges for the final event, and yeah.
Awesome. So on that note, using the reference relatively broadly, I would say that the CTF community gave birth to the Cyber Grand Challenge. Mike Walker started with a vision by arguing to his bosses that the best way to develop cyber warriors was by having them compete in these CTF competitions. He extended this vision to bring about focused advancement in the specific domain of automated program bug finding, patching, and even exploitation, which covers both the offensive and the defensive operations. How do you see this community continuing to contribute in the domain over the next few years, or how should they contribute? Can we continue to cultivate advances in this state of automated cyber reasoning from the CTF community? And how can we influence, or what can we do about it? Anybody want to jump on that?
I can take first. So I think this trend towards automation started far before the Cyber Grand Challenge did. And what you see is at high level of play, there are teams that have always prepared ahead of time and brought tools with them that allow them to scale to greater effect during competitions that are extraordinarily difficult. But the way the Capture the Flag teams, organizing teams have dealt with this thus far is they've provided roadblocks that deter the effectiveness of those tools. They've created new CPU architectures, run on strange operating systems, only announced those kinds of things days, sometimes hours before the competitions start. That is one valid way to deal with these tools. However, from the CTF community's perspective, I'd actually like to see the opposite occur. I'd like to see organizers announce that, hey, we're running on Windows, and tell people 3 months ahead of time so that we have a common goal in mind when the teams begin to develop tools, and we have a real-world challenge set that we're building them for. So I think thus far, what we've done is we've tried to hold back these advancements, and I want to let them free. So that's one way that I think the CTF community can maybe evolve to embrace these kinds of tools.
Got two former organizers. Either of you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I was just weighing in on whether I wanted to weigh in.
I know my
yeah. So as an organizer of DEF CON or any other contest, right? Like it's all about when you structure the contest, you have to figure out what you're trying to measure, and you ultimately declare a winner. And what are they the winner of? They're the most proficient in X, or the greatest can scale Y or whatever, right? So if the thing that you're trying to measure is you have the single best human hacker, or the single set, or the set of human hackers, right? If that's the thing you're trying to measure, then throwing these sorts of roadblocks in makes sense, right? Yep. If you're trying to push forward some aspect of science or engineering that scales beyond one man or 8 men or 50 or however many actually compete in these things these days, then you have to structure the competition differently, right? And I forget the wording of your question, but you kind of left the tail end of that with how is CGC change, or what does the future of these sorts of competitions look like? And I think for the contests that are organized in that maybe more strategic way, or the way that diminishes the value that one person can have, we'll see that the only teams that can be competitive will be the teams that show up with the automation. And historically, it's tools and sets of tools that enhance a human because they have the right IDA Pro skips or the reverse engineering tools or whatever. And I think now, even in the past 18 months, it's become you have to have more of a CRS-like, a machine-like capability that can actually reason about the problems that are actually set forward, not just the pieces of the problems. And we saw that summer before last with Mayhem, which more or less competed in the DEF CON contest autonomously, and then also the third place team was able to use their CRS because they also qualified as humans, so they sort of had a hybrid team that year. But now it's for the highest levels of competition, it's almost like table stakes to get in and be competitive.
Very good. Anyone?
Yeah, I'll say that in the last 5 years, we tried it a few different ways. So 2 years ago, I believe, we announced, or I guess it would have been 3 years ago, we announced on DEF CON's closing ceremony stage in front of everybody that 1 year later we would host the DEF CON finals on the Decree architecture, the Decree operating system, 32-bit x86.
Which means CGC compatible.
Right. So we were very out and in the open about how we were doing, and one of the more surprising things about that was, despite doing that and constantly being on Twitter and constantly publishing supplemental documentation about the operating system and separate blog posts and separate Twitter posts about everything, we had teams show up and say, we don't know how, we don't understand, what is decree? Like, we've been forecasting our punch for a year. Like, I don't know what else you want from us. That being said, the most recent, in our final year, we took the entirely other approach, and about 24 hours before the competition started, we gave them a processor manual of an entirely synthetic processor that we had created over the course of about 18 months with all sorts of really weird things like 9-bit bytes and 27-bit words and all sorts of really frustrating things to try to throw as many wrenches as we could into automation.
It's competing demands, certainly. So I'm going to ask another question and then open it up for anyone that has been starting to brew. So continue to brew, and I'll be ready for you. Kind of like on that theme, despite the gains, it seems like, and I think what I'm hearing is that we're stuck at this state where we have either machine-only competitions or we have human competitions, and it's hard to really get a blend. You talked about, like, there's competing demands, right? Are you trying to prove who the best team of hackers are or who the people that can produce the best tools are? So there's a significant hurdle in designing competitions that machines and humans can compete collaboratively together while maintaining this highly competitive nature, right? This is the world stage. It is the world championship of hacking. Do you believe that it's possible to design a competition in such a way that we can bring these automated systems and humans together? And secondly, will the current generations of players accept it?
I think it goes back to what Tim said. You have to be cognizant that what you're measuring is no longer simply the skills that someone has in their head, but also the combined output of them plus the machine. So there may be other ways that you can modify a competition to be more amenable to that. Instead of occurring over the period of 3 days, over a weekend, you may want to extend it out as like a 1 to 2 hour thing over a period of 2 months. That give teams and give players the ability to build a tool set over that period of time in a way that is kind of equal with all others. I don't know, like that's an idea, but definitely, like when you look at CTF competitions that do take full advantage of these tools and allow their use and promote their use, it doesn't look like CTF today.
I would also step back. We've had really kind of one machine-on-machine contest. It's really cool to talk about the lessons learned, but it's hard to draw too many conclusions from it.
Sure.
So I think that I would encourage people to have more of that. I think it would be wrong to say we've done it, we know about it, because we've only done it once, and that's just not how things work. So I think that's one of the questions. For the human, I totally agree that it's going to be hard to measure, but there will be a winner, and I think you'll learn some things from just seeing how they interact. Finally, I think there's this huge opportunity that if you look at the top teams at DEF CON, they have strategies as far as how they go about exploiting. And the machine versus machine, we definitely had a strategy, but we had one that we came up with before the contest with a lot of our unknowns. We played it. It did pretty well, but there was no evolution of the strategy. And so trying to engage the human in improving strategy, I think, is huge. Like when I look at the DoD, we haven't had a major cyber conflict, like in the same sort of way that we've had land wars. So you have to think at some point there's going to be like a Napoleon of cyber. What is he going to do? And what can we be doing to try to think about that ahead of time?
I'd love for there to be a good way to measure the efficacy of hybrid systems, but Mike Walker always used to say that Kasparov plus a calculator is a hybrid system, and one that could probably beat most other hybrid chess playing teams. So how we measure Chris Eagle with a CRS versus Rene Rush with a CRS, and how we compare those two competing head to head. What does Eagle bring versus what does a CRS bring, and how do we separate these two? I think it's a really interesting problem that I haven't heard a satisfying answer for yet.
Very good. Is there any questions ready to ruminate from the audience? There's one in the back. If we can get a mic back there, please.
Gentlemen, my question for you would be, are there any tools that you feel would give a CTF competitor just sort of an unfair advantage, specifically tools that you would have to pay for, or any tools that you deliberately try to design problems so that you couldn't just take advantage of this tool to solve it very easily?
I mean, we did that all the time. That's part of the sort of community trick. So both as organizers and as competitors, that's just another wrench you can throw out. So I don't know if you're alluding to a specific tool or not, but you might be talking about IDAPRO, for example, which is a relatively expensive tool, especially if you're on a grad school sort of budget. And for example, when we were competitors, we developed, at that time, the teams were more or less directly connected with each other. So when you wanted to have some offense against another team, you literally mounted attacks directly at their sort of network segment. And because they're network connected, we could take advantage of a feature of IDA that does license checking over the network, and we could invalidate all of the license checks for anybody that was connected. So things like that and ODAs and bugs and Wireshark and things like that are just common in the culture, right? The organizers and the competitors do that sort of thing. But particularly from an organizer perspective, again, it goes back to what you want to measure, and you can run the whole gamut, right? You can have thousands of challenges that are all relatively simple, sort of computer programming security 101, like lightweight buffer overflows. But then if you have thousands of them, can people scale, right? Or you could have like just one challenge that is just so hard, and it's designed particularly to break the algorithms that IDAPRO uses for disassembly or something like that, right? And organizers do it differently. Sometimes it's different every year. Sometimes there's a mix. You see this a lot in a qualifier type space where typically you have some sort of a board, and the board is ordered in perceived difficulty ratings. So in the lower difficulty ones, almost everybody can play. You can bring the free tools and the expensive tools. When you get to the more difficult ones, now you have to have a pretty high level of proficiency, and perhaps you're required to have some very capable tools, whether they're expensive or not.
Yeah, I'll say that we would intentionally break all tools, or across the set of challenges, we would have bugs that would even break like GDB and obj dump, causing infinite loop or memory consumption beyond the limits of what the system would have in it. But one of our lines in the sand that kind of separated the truly talented hackers from the script kiddies was the ability to adapt in the face of challenges like this. So we would intentionally break both the free tools and the expensive tools, and we would measure the teams that were able to deal with this and adapt and either find the bug in the tool and fix it, or just transition to another tool to allow them to solve the problem.
In the CTF culture, it's all game oriented, right? And the organizers want to play a game too, and like that's one of the meta games that the organizers play. So.
Very good. Any other questions that are ready from our audience? I have another one on, we mentioned like measuring, Dustin, you measuring like whether or not Chris Eagle plus CRS or someone else plus CRS and like what the output is. I'm curious to see, because I would say that the Army, like many other organizations, would like to be able to hand our cyber personnel this system, right? This cyber reasoning system that they can use to defend our networks, right? To find vulnerabilities, patch them, exploit them. Mm-hmm. Do you see in the future, or do you see that these automated systems will allow entry or mid-level skilled personnel to operate at a much higher level of efficiency with these automated systems, or are we still going to be restricted to combining our most elite personnel, the ones that are 50 to 100 times better than their peers, with these cyber reasoning systems.
So my perspective on the issue is that I think these systems only operate as deep as their operator can take it. So like what they allow you to do is they allow you to scale. So if you have a junior engineer, what the junior engineer is capable of doing is finding a huge number of shallow bugs across a wide surface area. However, like when I look at the top echelons of exploitation today, the kinds of bugs that you need to find that allow you access to the targets that you'd care about for operational reasons, when you talk about an iPhone or a browser or those kinds of entry points into a person's life, those bugs are based on a deep semantic understanding of those programs that only a human can gain. And what a CRS or what an automated tool can do for that is significantly different. So I think kind of like the meta question here is, who are we building these tools for and what do they get out of it? And that's like kind of a divergent answer, that there's ways that you can evolve the CRSs to work for junior people, and there's ways that you can evolve it to work for more advanced people, and there are two different evolutionary paths.
I'm going to take a slightly different tack, I think, than Dan on this. I think that if you're building CGC type tools like this, autonomous, like the whole goal is to replace those lowly skilled people. Like, what are they doing? At that point, you don't build self-driving cars to assist a poor driver. You replace the poor driver. And so I'm of the hope, actually, that we won't need a whole bunch of monkeys to babysit the tools if the tools are done right. I think if there is a person there, I kind of wonder what they're doing. I think the higher end people who have that deep understanding and the creativity, they can employ the tools, add to the tools, can maybe even perform better than the tools on those really hard problems like the iPhone and so on. But for the basic stuff, I would say just automate it. Like, we don't need someone babysitting it. I think there is, like, one of the things I've noticed is there tends to be like a lack of trust to release control to tools. There's been this presumption since the CGC that, oh, CGC systems, well, what if we combine it with a human? It would, of course, be better. And that's like an assumption that's never been tested.
So, I mean, in the CyberGrant Challenge, we had an excellent opportunity to automate ourselves because we had Decree, which was built for automation. But in the real world, when you want to use these tools, there's this unstated assumption that was made in the competition that that they wouldn't have to set them up. But if I want to run an automated tool on a real program I get from a client, I need to have a reverse engineer or someone with some kind of software exploitation skill install the program, configure the program, get it into some kind of state that I wish to test, and minimally maybe sometimes write a driver where the automated tool can hook up. So
yeah, exactly. But I think that's more of a mid to high level. I mean, this isn't your Cisco certified IT professional.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So well, I made my point.
Yeah, maybe. What do you think, Dustin?
I think we need to figure something out. I think if our goal is to just throw experts at it, we're going to need something like 40 times the number of hackers that exist in the world to just solve the problems we have today and not the problems that we are continuing to create tomorrow and next week. And I think China has us beat on the attrition race. So finding something interesting to do with either improving the automation or finding interesting ways to team human insights to allow for automation to go deeper and find these bugs that have these like semantic meanings. And cyber reasoning systems are great at finding these bit finicky memory corruption vulnerabilities. How you guys do at finding use after free and double free and things like this?
Yeah. Hasn't been tested. I mean, no one's asked us to do a lot on that.
Looks like we got
I think so I'm a big believer, like if DARPA put out $60 million again and a $2 million cash prize and made it use after free, that there would be some cool stuff that came out of it.
yeah.
Just saying.
Just saying. Or if it was like, you have to, the challenge, right, is that DARPA would have to specify the type of bug, right, or the class of bugs.
I will say that every finals competitor recognized that this was a one-time competition. I sort of realized it afterward almost, like now it's done and now we can't evolve our strategy. We can't evolve the way that we've connected these components. And We can't improve, if any of the individual components improve, we don't have a place to demonstrate that. So.
Yeah.
We have a question down here. It's coming.
Just to follow up to that discussion in light of your talk this morning, David, if you said something about lots of computers, is there any reason to believe that the United States, you said we can't compete with China on some attrition and other things, is there any reason to believe that the United States will be better at doing the automation than other countries? And if we're even nearly equal, but not quite as good, does that mean we're dead? Or do we need people's skills?
So this is an interesting question. So personally, I think the United States is always going to have an advantage in here because of the way we structure our culture and our education system to come up with that new innovation. I think that's, everything being equal if we're all identical, right? And then, of course, if China has more engineers that are of the same quality of us, they can build cyber autonomy systems that are just as good as ours. And because all the manufacturing of hardware is done in China, they'll have all the chips. And so they'll win, right? So you kind of have this kind of fatalistic if they can do that. I think the one thing that the US has going for it that I don't see as much in other countries is the world-class education system for building those creative ideas. I mean, the world's best in computer science come to the US. The world's best in the US don't go anywhere else for education. And I think that's something we have to harness.
I think we had a question here in the middle.
Hi, thanks. So my question is just, are you all aware of any tools that do a really good job in training, like say middle school or high school students in the areas of cyber competitions where the tools are actually intended for CTF training purposes?
I mean, I would say if you go to picoctf.com, the one that CMU runs is pretty good for teaching people on a gentle curve, and it could always be gentler to get up to CTF, to do CTFs. And one of the things we've noticed is a lot of high school kids have started to create their own contests, which is, I think, huge because high school kids, you get this exponential effect where if you run one contest and you get a few people excited and they go run a contest, they get a larger crowd and so on.
Yeah, I think there's HSCTF is another one, but PicoCTF is clearly the best quality in that community. There's another one that's always ongoing named micro-corruption.
Oh yeah, micro-corruption.
I like to give out.
That's fantastic, yeah.
Yeah, but the opportunities for learning these things at that age is so good nowadays. I'm so jealous.
Yeah, I mean, I think these are huge because we did a study on this, and a huge number of high school guidance counselors still don't know cybersecurity is a field. And so, I'm not quite as optimistic as the last panel was that the problem will just solve itself. Because when I see, when I was a professor, people coming in, they didn't even know computer security was a field. And CMU and a few universities do have stellar cybersecurity curriculums, but we're really a minority, and we kind of have this bias that everyone must be like us, but it's not the case. So we have to do more at the lower levels. And to me, it's just astounding. We have reading, writing, arithmetic. The other thing kids always do is interact with technology. So I think computer security and privacy should be fundamental. I mean, it's never too early to teach your kid about what a terms of service is, how to do a safe password, what people can learn by trying to, quote, dox you online, and then graduate into these higher concepts.
A personal anecdote here, my dad's been a high school teacher for 31 years, and I've gone back to that high school and tried to teach them, hey, there's this PicoCTF thing, and your students can win prizes, and they can get to travel, and they can get awards. And even selling it that way, it's hard to stick. It usually depends on having a person at that high school that takes it under their wing and grows the program. Without that, it's just not going to get momentum and start.
Yeah.
And that person should really just engage the community, right? There's plenty. I mean, there's jerks in the community. There's jerks in any community, but the community is relatively welcoming as a whole, and there's a wealth to learn.
Yeah. Very good. I think we have a question in the back.
Hey guys, thanks for being here. I want to ask you the question in terms of the concept of CTF, because the mention's been made more than once that there's that 50 times better, 100 times better coder than the masses. And assuming that we don't all wind up being a first season, yeah, I know, I'm trying not to name names. I'm assuming that we don't turn into a first season Star Trek episode where the machines are just fighting the machines. So what do you think from the CTF perspective could be done to help fill in that gap between the 50 times better and the 1 times better?
Maybe I don't understand, but fill in the gap how? What's the purpose of filling in the gap?
Because if we have a large number of people who will have a certain level of coding skills, then we have a very small number of people who have that 50 times better coding skills. Does it make sense to make the effort to use CTF in some way to help bring some of those people who are not at the 50% level to fill in that gap between the really good small number of coders and the large number of people who are adequate?
Oh,
that
yeah.
Make sense?
I mean, I think all of us up here have used CTF as an educational tool to teach people more about systems and the composition of different disparate fields, you know, how operating systems overlaps with computer architecture, overlaps with programming languages, overlaps with X and Y and Z, which ends up creating a better software developer. And it's something that, you know, over the last few years, I've been very encouraged by people outside the security community playing in these competitions. I think we're all in agreement that these are excellent ways to start climbing up that ladder to be a better engineer overall.
See, the secret is, like, for Pico CTF, this high school contest, we have like 70 problems. And if I advertise it as 70 extracurricular homework problems, no one would play. What CTFs really do is they gamify learning about stuff. And I think that's really the secret for bringing them up. That being said, I mean, there's kind of, you want to raise up the bottom. Don't think that we should shy away from the idea that it's a sport, and there are people who are 50 times better just because of that dedication and match of talent and at the right place at the right time. I don't think it's belittling the people who are 50 times worse to say that, you know, there is a Kobe Bryant in basketball. And so I look at it the same way in the hacking community. It doesn't diminish if you're not at that level, as long as you have the ability, if you put in the time, effort, and have the talent, that you have an open access to bringing yourself up.
There are definitely leagues of competition and skill level, and so like Pico is aimed towards the high school ages. You have some of these wargaming sites where it's not necessarily a CTF that takes place over a certain date range, but it's just kind of this ongoing thing for you to practice in. And then you have like some of the very competitive leagues like the DEF CON community. Like when we would run our qualifier, we'd have a category for the very simple challenges. I think we called it Babies First every year, and it was always 1 point per question and intended to take the experts about 5 minutes and maybe take the novices a few hours to work through. And then the rest of the problems were not for them. And it was really, we never found a satisfying answer besides just telling people, too bad, this is not the appropriate venue for this. But there was always people who would solve all of the babies first and then try to solve the rest of the problems. They're like, I can't solve this, I need a hint. I'm like, I can't give you a hint right now. This is a competition. If I give you a hint, I have to give everybody a hint, and then we're not competing, we're just sharing, and that's not what this event is designed to do.
Yeah. I mean, part of the reason why Pico CTF and my own Seesaw are so large is because they're really easy. They're easy introductions to get into the field. So the field kind of narrows as you get a bit more difficult.
For the person asking about how to get involved at the high school level or just involved in general, it's important to note that these communities are so large now that you can play in a CTF just about every other weekend or so. So like you might not win, but like jumping in and just being immersed in it is one way to pick it up and learn and start engaging the community, right? So like Seesaw is this weekend, although it's offline, right?
Yes, this one's the final.
This one's offline, but it's a bad example. But like they're very common now, right?
But if you, like right now, you went to hackcenter.com, you could literally with Google Auth signed in and have a shell on your cell phone. Like I've actually used it to do SSH for my phone. Yeah.
I have a slightly different question. I think Dan, you'll have some perspective on this, but I think sometimes within the Department of Defense we can be a little bit myopic, and I'm curious to see what you think these advances in cyber reasoning systems, how they are affecting the corporate world, and if you see that they might be faster to adopt this with reduced bureaucracy, and what's your take on how this will affect the corporate world?
Sure. I mean, I think automated testing tools are fantastic, but I think they're only usable from an offensive perspective. I actually don't think there's great utility in a CRS like if I go to any of my enterprise, financial, tech, healthcare, you name it, They're not interested in the full suite of tools that a CRS offers. They don't want automated patching. They don't care about exploitation. They have access to source code. They can fix those things. And in fact, when you do automated patching, you end up introducing so much uncertainty into the future execution of that code that it's an untenable decision for most CISOs or CTOs to make about a program that they're maintaining. What I do think is useful is the bug finding component. We have done leave behinds where when we do engagements and we look at a complex piece of software, we'll write a driver, which is the little piece that hooks up the automated tool to a larger system. We'll write that driver to instrument and to analyze the code that our client has created. And they can use that after we're gone. So we do a 1 month long assessment, but then for the next 11 months before we come back again for a new yearly test, they've been relying on that tool to make sure that they don't accidentally catch fire, that there's no really terrible issues that become systemic before we actually walk back in the door. So I think there's kind of an element of product management that needs to be applied to the CRS technology in general. Who is the user? What is the value they want out of it? How are they going to use it? What are they like feeling right now? And what's their intentions? Because we created a great research advance, but the way that gets applied in industry is going to be a little bit different than maybe we imagined going through the competition the first time. I'm sure you might have a different opinion.
I suspect.
So I think for AllSecure, we have products in this, and we found varying opinions among people we've talked to in the customer set. We find a lot of people who want to be able to have some confidence in the software that they integrate. And this is something, if you go and you talk to an aircraft manufacturer, they didn't write every piece of software that's on that aircraft. They're integrating stuff. And so they're finding this ability to test other people's stuff for QA is huge. So I think the bug finding is big. We've also found like this byproduct of CRSs that we kind of throw away. The tests that we generate are huge. People love the automated regression tests. It's like the most boring IT problem of how do I make sure this patch doesn't break things? And this was like somewhat solved in the CGC, and no one pays attention to it.
I concur with that, yeah.
So I think that's big. For the patching, we've actually found customers are excited about it in certain use cases. One of the big use cases would be in IoT, where essentially you have abandonware, something that's not supported. I don't think the automated patching is like Microsoft Explorer, Internet Explorer has a problem, we're going to patch it before Microsoft. They have a fantastic security team. They sign all their code, so even if you patch it, like it wouldn't be signed, and it's probably not safe to run. But there's a huge amount of abandonware out there, and if you kind of think of the landfills of the future in software, it's just going to keep growing and growing and growing, where someone is going to be running software that's long abandoned. Every time I go to Dulles, I see Windows XP, right? This is unsupported software. And so I think that the patching tools is going to be really important for the legacy systems.
Very good. I think I had a question in the middle.
So this is kind of a quick question, but it may unravel, which is in engaging young kids, in essence, and bringing them up and teaching them these tools, these methodologies, et cetera, they can get in trouble quite easily with those skill sets. CTFs are an outlet for that, but there's also a need for sort of ethical guidance. And you mentioned that you need somebody to shepherd a program at a high school in order for it to really take off, or whatever it may be. Any thoughts about that and in the relation to the next generation? Are ethics is ethics built into this education sort of thrust in CTFs, or is CTF just a CTF?
I mean, I think CTFs are not specifically designed as the right part of talking about ethics. CTFs are contests and gamified learning. I think you can include some issues about ethics in this. To me, this idea of ethics is actually kind of a weird one. First, legal and illegal is kind of more clearly defined. Like a lawyer can give you guidance on which one is that. Ethics is about a community standard as opposed to legal or illegal. And for me, I think one of the places, at least at CMU, we try to do is make sure people understand the implications of what they do so that they can apply their moral compass, their ethical compass in that domain. I mean, to be frank, I don't think I can take a person who is a absolutely crazy psychopath, teach him in a semester course about ethics, and then he'll never do anything bad. I just don't think that makes sense. No, we do this with chemistry. You know, we don't expect, hey, if before I teach you chemistry, you got to watch this episode of Breaking Bad about all the bad things that happened to Walter White. But I think you can teach kids about the implications of when you hack and you do things that are potentially easy for you to do, but they could do. A good example is scanning the internet is a stupid, easy thing to do. It's fun to do. Just scan the internet. You'll find lots of cool stuff. But one of the implications we try to teach people is like, here's an IP camera, the most popular one on Amazon. Look, you scan it and it crashes. There's like a mom who has a newborn baby. Do you want to be the jerk who crashes a mom's camera that's looking at the newborn baby? Maybe it's not illegal, maybe it's not unethical, but you can at least start thinking about the implications.
In general, when I hear people bring up that question, it's usually from somebody in academia who's using it as an excuse to say no to starting a program or starting a CTF club. And I also feel just as strange about it as David does. But you know, in general, the way that I approach this is also from an illegal versus legal perspective, and the career opportunities and the amount of money that you can make operating within the law to practice this craft are tremendously higher than what you could do illegally. You know, a presentation that I liked to give to my students when I was a faculty member is I would talk about the rates of you know, profit, how much various things cost in the underground, what it takes to, you know, buy a vulnerability, buy an exploit, what it costs to you know, get access to a load, which is a load of stolen credit card numbers, and how much that goes for. And it's like pennies. It's far easier to build a career you know, doing this the way that we are. And you don't have to run the risk of getting arrested and spending your life in jail. And that's usually a compelling message for a kid. They care about dollars, right?
So there is an education component. There is a mentoring capacity. I mean, you both have basically said that there are, you know, teach them the right way. Don't tell them the right way, right?
Yeah, I think
horse to water.
Understand
kind of
the implications. I do think there's kind of a twist on this question I'd be interested in the other panelists on, which is in CTS, because you have these closed battles, and kind of the unwritten rule of DEF CON is there is no rules, except for maybe don't piss off the organizers.
Physical attacks have typically been discouraged.
Yeah, physical.
Unless you ask Eagle.
But it also gives you an opportunity to see strategies that may be considered unethical or immoral in the real world, like things like reflection attacks. What are your thoughts about this? Like, it gives you an opportunity to explore the pros and cons of those, as far as like whether you win or not whether they're ethical. What do you think?
I think people need to write better payloads.
All right.
I mean, yeah, I roughly, all bets are off, right? Like,
Yeah.
So for those of you who don't know, like a reflection attack is if you exploit me, I can steal it and use it to exploit someone else. And in every hacking contest, people steal exploits and throw them against everyone else, and it's necessary to win.
This is not a unique phenomenon to CTF, though. Like,
yeah.
If we are attacked, or if our infrastructure is attacked, we can observe the attacker attacking us, and we could then reflect that attack back at them if they were running the same piece of software. So
yeah.
I don't think of this as a unique.
Yeah, ultimately, I think it goes back to what you're trying to measure, and you can incentivize that in different ways, right? Because it becomes a strategy that people in this room are all too well aware of, where by the time you've launched your attack, you've tipped your hand. And in a game that, say, is commodities based, you know, you have to have the strategic decision to try and use it early and often, or hold it back and assume that you have a capability that nobody else has, and sort of go for all the points at the end. And it all plays into different types of strategy. And like Dustin said, if you're good enough, you make it more clandestine and it's harder to see.
I have a slightly different question. So Dan, you touched on this, and it so jolted with me that, do you have hope? Computer security has said to have been offense dominant, right? That defenders need to defend 100% of the time, and the offense only needs to get it right once. So do you think, but you kind of alluded that maybe you see that these automated cyber reasoning systems may only be really completely useful in offense. Is there a hope that these cyber reasoning systems may change the balance between the offense and the defense in the future?
So I don't think it's necessarily the way that we imagined. Like on defense, the innovation that I see coming down the pipe is at the system level. It's the actions on objectives level. It's the, you know, now that I've created an exploit, I have to use it to do something. And the using it to do something part is far easier for me to reason about and far easier for me to react to than it is within the scope of just a single program. So kind of if we expanded the scope of the Cyber Grand Challenge to include not just exploit generation and patching, but also, well, you know, we're going to have this system and you have to exploit it and you have to navigate through it to find some kind of key file. And there's a monitor that's looking at all the actions that occur that could potentially determine that something out of spec is occurring. And in industry, we see these kinds of innovations already. You see your CrowdStrikes, your Carbon Blacks, your OS Query, where these systems are already building in that kind of automated detection and response that I think are far more practical for defenders to actually implement. So that's where I see that leading, and I actually have high hopes that that will mature quite quickly. Whereas on the CRS end, I think what we're really talking about is fine-tuned discovery of software security issues and not necessarily patching or mitigating them. There's other areas of research that I think apply better to defense for software security issues in particular.
Anyone else on the panel want to weigh in on the hope we might have for the future? Any other questions for the audience? I have one in the back. Way in the back.
Put your hand back up.
You mentioned that we're not going to see the kind of large-scale, kind of CGC-size investments in finished CRS systems, but is it possible to divorce some fundamental research, say hire the cheaper mathematicians, theoretical computer scientists, to go after some problems that can perhaps be theoretical enablers for new strategies or for new techniques, as opposed to trying to build new platforms from the ground up?
So one thing I'd like to see is to move away from the single competition aspect of the Cyber Grand Challenge and make it something that's continuously ongoing. I think Dustin's company in particular contributed something of great value to this community, which were the challenge sets that we all competed on for the Cyber Grand Challenge. These are vulnerable programs that mimic real ones with very complex functionality and have embedded vulnerabilities in them that are well understood. What I'd like to see is more of a Netflix prize than the single event that occurs over a weekend type challenge, where we have an ongoing leaderboard and academics or industry researchers like myself can work at our leisure to improve systems and get immediate feedback around what kind of performance improvement that ended up generating. And it's something where you could kind of cut it off. Every year we give a prize at some random date. Or we could break it into categories of, certain challenge sets exercise this functionality, certain challenge sets exercise this different functionality. And it really mirrors, other areas of computer science matured rapidly when continuous performance benchmarking systems like that were released. Things like the SAT challenges, the ImageNet challenges that the machine learning community used. And that's kind of the reason why you see all this incredible innovation of image recognition and all the work that Google and Facebook and whoever else has been doing in that field is because they had a really easily available benchmark that they could compare themselves to. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where I see the research having to go and the way that researchers interact with it for our field.
Yeah. Can I think this is a really important question. As someone coming from academia, I think that in theory, a lot of the problems that were addressed in the Cyber Grand Challenge were long ago solved in theory. There are no memory safety bugs in most of the formal programming languages that a professor, myself, would advocate. We wrote our cyber reasoning tools in OCaml, which is a statically checked programming language where a lot of these errors just don't occur. I think the challenge and the importance of the competitions is the real life is dirty. Not everything is implemented to spec. Not everyone agrees to use highly specific functional programming languages that are only used in a very small community. And so I think that thinking too much is going to come from academia that overall solves the problem is a little bit wishful. I think great ideas come from there, but you still need the 6.1, 6.2, 6.3, 6.4, the whole pipeline of research with grand challenges that measure really, really accurately which tech is the best and openly which tech is the best, because it's only in those grand challenges that all that dirtiness of real life really becomes an aspect.
So CGC had a few outcomes or results, and the one that you're talking about is probably arguably the most important, that like it worked, right? So like the question from 2013 was roughly, could a purpose-built machine play in the highest levels of CTF, right? Like that's like sort of the fundamental question that grew into a huge program. And so the answer is yes, like that's the huge result, more or less. But it's important to note that the 7 teams that made it to finals all successfully competed. So not only is the answer yes, but like all 7 of them did. And it's very similar to the automobile challenge, where it was posed right on the edge of that being really possible in the real world. And the first time the challenge was done, none of the cars finished, and then the second time they all finished, right? Mm-hmm. So there was a winner because it was a contest, but like they all finished. So that was a massive leap forward in engineering and sort of real world ability. But the other important part to note from CGC is the 7 finalists, the diversity in the teams was huge. So you had like the large defense contractors, you had the startups born out of academia, you had 2-person teams from not necessarily the most well-known schools, right? So all across the board, and the difference in score, the margin was not as vast as maybe you'd predict, right? You didn't really have teams fully falling on their face, and you didn't have teams completely running away with it. So I guess the other twist to your question was, do we need to go after particular vocations? I don't remember, like mathematicians and theoretical physicists. I don't remember exactly who you said, but part of the success was that it wasn't narrowly focused to go after like one particular group. It's an open challenge, right? The same way that out of the CTF community, anybody can play. And I think we need to find ways to properly incentivize the people to self-select and participate in these competitions.
$2 million goes a long way.
So that's an incentive?
There's also a lot of, so I think we fielded 81 challenges in the final event, and
82,
only
yeah.
82 challenges. Only 21 were solved by any automation, and no one piece of automation solved all 21. In fact, to get to the 21, you have to combine the first place and the third place team together.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of outstanding problems that I hope that people who are trying to push this forward will use those problems instead of less robust problem sets like the NIST SATE-5 data set, I think that's tested off of Juliet, which is a series of something along the order of 50 lines of code where it's very simple setup, vulnerable or not vulnerable function call, and termination, whereas the CGC services were thousands of lines of code where very few of those lines would contribute to the vulnerability, but you had to be able to reason through the entire application in order to express these vulnerabilities. So as people try to push stuff forward, I hope that we see them using robust challenge sets and not these very tiny toys and going, there exists a solution, we're done here.
I think the reason why, 82 compared to Juliet's got, 100,000 different kinds of bugs, and part of the reason why it's an effective benchmark is because it was actually built by humans writing code the way that humans would, creating systems that were complicated. They aren't automatically generated tests. Automatically generated tests are more amenable to be solved by automated systems. So it's really, I think, the best benchmark the industry has at the moment for reviewing the performance of these systems going forward.
I've got a question over here.
Yeah, real quick. So Mike Walker has publicly said that he thought another benefit of the decree system was that we wouldn't have to worry about disclosure of discovering vulnerabilities during CTFs going forward. And he sort of was calling for maybe future CTFs to use the decree system, but I don't think we've really seen that since the DEF CON finals. So do any of you have any opinions on that? Do you see that actually being a viable solution going forward?
We have seen some. So the contest directly after, so at DEF CON was run entirely in a CGC compatible way. So decree is a specification, not an implementation. So even in CGC, we had 2 implementations. We had sort of the public and the private implementation of decree. But we have seen in several CTFs use components of, as a component of their CTF, use decree. So I don't know if we've seen another one that was attack defense style, but in
The Chinese did
did they?
a few months ago. They did an attack defense on decree, I believe.
So there was at least
Linux.
one.
Oh, just
right?
Linux.
It was Linux.
And we've seen several in the Jeopardy style or the game board style to have 1 or 2 sort of decree-based challenges. So there's some uptick, but There's several challenges to adopting that sort of system. The CGC competition was a brokered competition, so the infrastructure did all of the actions on behalf of the competitors, and it's sort of hard to embrace the competitive nature that a human has in a competition in that sort of brokered environment, because you've been working for hours, you've been up late all night, and you finally achieve some capability against software. Now you have to like give it to the system and like wait, and like you don't get results back, you don't get that immediate gratification. So there's some barrier to like fully embracing it. I think that the community has some difficulty embracing.
I think like from automated tool, as soon as you do it on Decree, it certainly embraces a set of criteria that was very important for the contest, and rightly so. But it also means that because your automated tool runs on Decree, next thing someone's going to say is, can I use it to check this program? And the answer is no. So if you do continue to invest in Decree, you actually have to set aside money, I think, for that transition. And in our experience, it's not the sort of thing where it's going to happen overnight. It's going to be 6 or 8 people for 6 months adapting it to a new OS, assuming it's not too wildly different. So I think that's one thing. I think Decree was specialized really for this particular competition. From the educational, I totally agree. Like, hackers want to get the shell, and there is no shell on Decree. Like, this command prompt is like this gratification, and like we're really just like rewarding. I'm sure there's a dopamine release if someone like puts you in an fMRI that goes along with getting that shell that you wouldn't get with Decree. From the educational perspective.
There's a cross-domain study to happen there.
Yeah.
We have the tools to work on real systems today. Like, we could have easily done the Cyber Grand Challenge on like Chrome level sophistication, but I think Decree solves a lot of problems that aren't technical ones. Like, it makes it easier for the government to fund this kind of research, because I said it right. It distances them from funding tools that can be used directly for the creation of operationally ready software security tools. So that's a great benefit. You run into the roadblocks, like David said, of, well, what can we actually do with this after it's all over?
I mean, I'm not under NDA anymore. I can straight up tell you, in 2013, there was a mandate that we couldn't knowingly release software that somebody could run on a production system that would knowingly make that system less secure. So if we were publishing software that somebody could just put on a Linux server and run it and then make that server vulnerable, that was a write-out requirement of the design of the competition from the beginning.
Yeah. We don't see other countries strap arms behind their back this way. When you look at European funding of similar research programs, they're all in on Linux or all in on Windows, and sometimes I think we should just get over it too.
Very good. Any last questions? I'd like to thank my panel today. I appreciate your time and your insight and on the things that you've offered. And thank you for participating. And that's all we have.
Thanks.
Thank you.